It's official. These are the states in America that consume the most beer per capita. This ranking ensures that both small and large states compete on an equal playing field. To begin, let's dive into the details. Not all beers are created equal. So, which beers do Americans consume the most? Interestingly, the top beer brand in America is no longer Bud Light. If you can believe it, it's now Modelo, and here's why. However, Bud Light still enjoys significant popularity. Meanwhile, Corona emerges as the favored beer in most states, though not in the highly populated ones like New York, Texas, and California. With this context, let's explore which states have the highest beer consumption. It's fascinating to note that different regions exhibit significantly varying levels of consumption. This diversity is intriguing to think about. I have developed some theories regarding these patterns, which I will share later. Now let's move on to the rankings, including Washington, D.C. Each year, the average person consumes about 0.52 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to approximately 111 beers annually, which breaks down to around 2.1 beers per week for each individual. Each person consumes approximately 0.76 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to around 162 beers per person each year, which averages out to about 3.1 beers per week. The annual consumption of ethanol from beer per person is approximately 0.78 gallons. This translates to about 166 beers per person each year, which breaks down to around 3.2 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes about 0.78 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to approximately 166 beers annually for each individual, which breaks down to around 3.2 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes about 0.82 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to approximately 175 beers annually per individual. On a weekly basis, this averages out to around 3.4 beers per person. The average yearly consumption of ethanol from beer per person amounts to 0.82 gallons. This translates to an annual intake of approximately 175 beers per person, which breaks down to about 3.4 beers each week. Each year, an average of 0.85 gallons of ethanol is produced from beer per person. This equates to about 181 beers consumed annually by each individual, which breaks down to approximately 3.5 beers per week. On average, each person consumes 0.88 gallons of ethanol from beer every year. This breaks down to approximately 188 beers annually per person, which translates to about 3.6 beers each week. Each year, an average person consumes approximately 0.88 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to about 188 beers annually, which breaks down to roughly 3.6 beers each week. Each year, an individual consumes about 0.92 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to approximately 196 beers annually, which breaks down to about 3.8 beers per week per person. Each person consumes an average of 0.94 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to about 201 beers per person each year, which breaks down to approximately 3.9 beers per week. Every year, the average person consumes approximately 0.94 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to about 201 beers annually, or roughly 3.9 beers each week per person. Each year, an average person consumes approximately 0.95 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to about 203 beers annually, which breaks down to roughly 3.9 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes 0.96 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to about 205 beers annually, which breaks down to approximately 3.9 beers each week. Each year, an average person consumes approximately 0.97 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to around 207 beers per person annually, or roughly 4 beers each week. Each year, the average person consumes approximately 0.98 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to around 209 beers annually, which breaks down to about 4 beers per week per person. Each year, the average person consumes about 1 gallon of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to approximately 213 beers annually, which breaks down to around 4.1 beers per week per person. Every year, each person consumes about 1.01 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. On average, this amounts to 215 beers annually per person. Breaking it down, that's approximately 4.1 beers each week. On average, each person consumes about 1.04 gallons of ethanol from beer every year. This translates to approximately 222 beers annually per person. Breaking it down further, that's about 4.0 beers each week. Each year, an individual consumes approximately 1.05 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to a total of 224 beers consumed annually per person. On a weekly basis, this averages out to about 4.3 beers per person. The average yearly consumption of ethanol from beer per person amounts to 1.05 gallons. This is based on an annual intake of 224 beers per person, which breaks down to approximately 4.3 beers each week. Each year, the average person consumes 1.07 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to approximately 228 beers annually, or about 4.4 beers each week. Each year, the amount of ethanol consumed from beer per person is approximately 1.07 gallons. This translates to an average of 228 beers consumed per person annually. Breaking it down further, that's about 4.4 beers per person each week. On average, each person consumes about 1.08 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to approximately 230 beers per person each year, which breaks down to around 4.4 beers per week. Each person consumes approximately 1.10 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to about 235 beers per person each year, averaging 4.5 beers per week. The average yearly consumption of ethanol from beer per person is 1.10 gallons. This breaks down to approximately 235 beers annually, which means about 4.5 beers per week for each individual. Each year, the amount of ethanol derived from beer consumed per person is 1.10 gallons. On average, a person drinks 235 beers annually, which breaks down to approximately 4.5 beers each week. Each year, an average person consumes about 1.1 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to approximately 235 beers annually, which breaks down to around 4.5 beers each week. Each year, the average person consumes 1.11 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to approximately 237 beers annually, which breaks down to about 4.6 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes approximately 1.13 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to about 241 beers annually, which breaks down to roughly 4.6 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes about 1.13 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to approximately 241 beers annually, which breaks down to about 4.6 beers per week per person. Each year, the average person consumes about 1.14 gallons of ethanol from beer. This equates to approximately 243 beers annually. On a weekly basis, this breaks down to about 4.7 beers per person. The average person consumes about 245 beers each year, which translates to roughly 4.7 beers per week. From this consumption, approximately 1.15 gallons of ethanol are derived annually per person. Each year, an average of 1.15 gallons of ethanol is produced from beer per person. This translates to about 245 beers consumed per individual annually. On a weekly basis, this averages out to approximately 4.7 beers per person. Each person consumes about 1.17 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This breaks down to approximately 250 beers per person each year, or around 4.8 beers per week. Each person consumes an average of 1.18 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to about 252 beers per person each year, which breaks down to roughly 4.8 beers per week. Each year, an individual consumes approximately 1.20 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to about 256 beers annually per person. On a weekly basis, this amounts to roughly 4.9 beers per individual. Each year, the average person consumes about 1.23 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to roughly 262 beers annually for each person, which breaks down to about 5 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes approximately 1.23 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This translates to around 262 beers annually, which breaks down to about 5 beers per person each week. Each year, the average person consumes about 1.24 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to approximately 265 beers annually per person. On a weekly basis, this amounts to roughly 5.1 beers per individual. Each year, an individual consumes about 1.24 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to roughly 265 beers annually, which breaks down to about 5.1 beers each week. Each year, an individual consumes approximately 1.24 gallons of ethanol from beer. This is based on an annual average of 265 beers per person, which breaks down to about 5.1 beers each week. Each person consumes an average of 1.26 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. This translates to about 269 beers per person each year, which breaks down to around 5.2 beers per week. The average person consumes about 1.31 gallons of ethanol from beer each year. This breaks down to roughly 279 beers annually, or about 5.4 beers per week. Each person consumes approximately 1.33 gallons of ethanol from beer annually. On average, this translates to about 284 beers per person each year, which breaks down to roughly 5.5 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes about 1.33 gallons of ethanol from beer. This equates to roughly 284 beers annually, which breaks down to around 5.5 beers per week. Each year, an average of 1.34 gallons of ethanol is consumed by an individual through beer. This translates to approximately 286 beers per person annually. On a weekly basis, this amounts to about 5.5 beers per individual. Each year, an individual consumes approximately 1.49 gallons of ethanol derived from beer. This equates to about 318 beers consumed annually per person, which breaks down to around 6.1 beers each week. The average person consumes about 1.59 gallons of ethanol from beer each year. This translates to approximately 339 beers annually, which breaks down to around 6.5 beers per week. Each year, the average person consumes approximately 1.67 gallons of ethanol from beer. This translates to about 356 beers annually, which breaks down to roughly 6.9 beers per week per individual. Each year, the average person consumes 1.87 gallons of ethanol from beer. This amounts to around 399 beers annually, which breaks down to approximately 7.7 beers each week. Interestingly, New Hampshire stands out as the only state where residents average more than 1 beer per day. At number 10, we have a three-way tie between Iowa, Louisiana, and Texas. Moving up, Hawaii takes the 9th spot. South Dakota comes in at 8th place. Sharing the 6th position are Maine and Nevada. Pennsylvania secures the 5th spot, while North Dakota ranks 4th. Vermont comes in 3rd, with Montana taking the 2nd spot. Topping the list at number 1 is New Hampshire. Here's what surprised me most. I was surprised to learn just how much beer is consumed in the Northeast. Taking a closer look at the list, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire are included in the top 6, with New Hampshire claiming the number 1 spot and Vermont at number 3. When you consider the top 5, you'll find 2 additional rural northern states, Montana and North Dakota, making the cut. Given the cold climate, it's no wonder people might reach for a drink to warm up. Something that stands out is the similarity between states with the highest per capita beer and wine consumption. In terms of wine consumption, Washington, D.C. leads the way, followed by states like California, New Hampshire, Vermont, Oregon, and Nevada. It's interesting to note that Maine doesn't make this list, but once again, several small northeastern states are prominent in these top consumption rankings. Alcohol consumption extends beyond just beer and wine. When considering overall alcohol consumption, which includes liquor, New Hampshire leads the nation. It's closely followed by Vermont, then Montana, North Dakota, and Nevada. It's worth noting that Nevada's ranking is likely influenced significantly by tourists enjoying themselves in Las Vegas. Which state's results do you find the most surprising? And which seem the least unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're interested in whether you think your state's results align with your expectations. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to The Coconut Mama on YouTube at youtube.com/@thecoconutmama for more.